She walked through iron gates in second-hand shoes, carrying nothing but silence and soft eyes. Into a mansion where cruelty wore lipstick and power dressed in diamonds. They mocked her, humiliated her, tried to break her spirit, but what they didn't know was that the man who owned it all, the billionaire behind the walls, had already chosen her, not as a servant, but as his queen. The rain had just stopped, but the sky still wore its sorrow. A silver bus hissed to a stop outside the ornate gates of the Whitmore estate. Beyond those gates sprawled a world few ever touched, a mansion carved in limestone and guarded by lion statues older than the city itself. And there she was, standing alone, holding a worn-out leather duffel, with raindrops still clinging to her lashes. A blonde girl with soft eyes in a second-hand coat. She didn't belong, not here, not among those who arrived in black escalades and silk gowns. Her name was Eden. She had come not as a guest, but as help, a favor owed, a debt cleared. The daughter of a maid who once saved a life that mattered. More so now, she was allowed in for a summer on the condition that she stayed quiet, stayed useful, and stayed invisible. The mansion was alive with preparation. Laughter echoed from white balconies. Heels clicked on Italian tile. The air smelled of jasmine and expensive secrets. Inside, Eden was shown her room, if you could call it that. A linen closet turned sleeping quarters. A cot, a bulb, and a silent reminder. She was lucky to be here. The guests had begun to arrive. One by one, young elites poured through the marble foyer, names that tasted like old money and private islands. Girls with glossy lips and boys with polished arrogance. Eden moved like a shadow, collecting glasses, arranging bouquets, answering bells. But the eyes followed her, not with kindness. They whispered. The blonde one, the maid's daughter, the charity case. Her presence was a glitch in their perfect illusion, a storm cloud at their champagne brunch. By the second day, the games began. Snide comments hidden in smiles. Tasks that doubled just as she finished them, spilled drinks she didn't spill. A dress accidentally ruined before the gala. They watched her react, hoping she'd crack, hoping she'd leave. But Eden, DIDN, single quotes T. She held her breath and her tears. She looked down. She worked harder. The mansion may have rejected her, but she wouldn't reject herself. What she didn't know was that someone else had noticed. Someone who saw more than her stained apron or borrowed shoes. From a high window of the east wing, behind layers of crystal and linen drapes, a figure watched her with quiet intensity. Not just anyone, the man who owned it all. Colton Whitmore, reclusive, brilliant, and wealthier than most. Countries, they hadn't seen him in weeks. Some said he had vanished again, that he didn't care about the party, that his heart had gone cold. But they were wrong. He was watching, and Eden had just become the only thing warm enough to thaw his frozen world. The mansion was a theater, and every hallway, a stage where roles were played, faces worn, and truths buried beneath gold-plated lies. But Eden moved through it without pretense. She carried trays heavier than her frame, scrubbed floors that mirrored her reflection, and never once asked for anything more than what she was given. She didn't speak back, didn't roll her eyes, didn't beg for kindness. And that puzzled them. The daughters of legacy, dressed in diamond-dusted silk, couldn't understand why the girl with sunlit hair and quiet strength wouldn't crack. So they pushed harder. One afternoon, they sent her with fresh linens to the East Wing, an off-limits place where whispers said he stayed, where Colton Whitmore vanished from the world, where no one dared go without an invitation. But Eden didn't know. She simply followed orders. Arms full of folded cotton, heart steady. The East Wing was silent. No music, no laughter, just the sound of her soft footsteps echoing through high halls. Portraits lined the wallsmen with sharp eyes and colder expressions, legacies of war, finance, and empire. She turned a corner and froze. There he was, Colton Whitmore, not in a suit or behind a podium, not as the world knew him, but in a plain white shirt, barefoot on the marble floor, staring out at the endless trees beyond his private balcony. He didn't look at her at first, just kept watching the storm clouds roll in, and then he turned. Their eyes met, and the world around her slowed. His gaze wasn't cruel like the others. It wasn't curious. It wasn't pity. It was something else, something that startled her more than any insult ever could. Recognition, like he'd seen her before. Not in this life, but somewhere deeper. She dropped the linens, apologized without words, bowed her head and turned away. But that moment stayed. Colton didn't say a word. He didn't need to. From that day on, something shifted. Eden began to notice things, small things. A pair of gloves replaced before she could ask. A path cleared when she entered the ballroom. The head maid suddenly silent when others mocked her. And then, the books. She found one on her cot, a first edition, poetry she once mentioned loving, though never aloud. Then another Jane Austen. Then a third Tolstoy, all tucked neatly beside her pillow with no note. But somehow, they felt spoken. Someone was watching her days unfold. Not with malice, but with care. And still, the others mocked. They saw her working with her hands and assumed she had no dreams. They saw her alone and believed she was unwanted. They watched her avoid eye contact and mistook it for weakness. But Colton watched everything else. He saw her hold the crying gardener's daughter when she scraped her knee, saw her feed the stray cat near the pantry at night, saw her pick wildflowers not for herself but to place them at the empty gravesite near the hedge maze. She didn't chase attention. She gave without needing to be seen, and for a man like Colton who had been seen his whole life, for all the wrong reasons, it was intoxicating. He didn't move fast, not yet, but he made sure that for the first time in her life, Eden would not be invisible. Not here, not in his house. Not anymore. Eden tried to convince herself that nothing had changed, but the glances from the staff were coincidence. But the books by her bed were kindness from a stranger. But the man in the east wing, Colton Whitmore, was just being polite. But a storm had begun to brew, not in the skies above, but beneath the mansion's polished perfection. Jealousy. It seeped into the air like a slow poison. The girls who once ruled the marble halls now felt a shift in the gravity of the room. They noticed how the servers gave Eden less work, how she carried herself straighter, like the weight of their ridicule no longer crushed her spirit. And worst of all, they noticed him. Colton. Appearing more often. Not in grand entrances, but in passing moments, lingering glances, quiet observation. He said little, but his silence screamed to those who had known him longest. He was watching her. And for the elite, who had grown up expecting to be chosen, the thought was unbearable. So, they escalated. It started small. A drink accidentally poured on her shirt. A tray tripped from her hands. A cruel note left in her laundry. But Eden held herself together. She had lived through worse. She had no father, a sick mother back home, and dreams too fragile to speak aloud. She had no luxury to cry over petty cruelty. But then came the gala, the summer's grandest event. It was the night the mansion transformed into a kingdom of silk and firelight. The chandelier blazed like the sun. Music floated through every corridor, and Eden, assigned to the back kitchens, was meant to remain out of sight. But fate had other plans. The chef cut his hand. Staff scrambled. Confusion bloomed, and Eden's sleeves, rolled, hair tied back, was sent just for a moment through the side entrance of the ballroom. With a tray of desserts. She walked in like a ghost. Past laughing elites. Past the girls in glittering gowns. And then, time stilled. Colton saw her. From across the room, surrounded by politicians and oil heirs and beautiful women who were all trying to win his attention. He saw her, not just noticed, saw, like she was the only soul in the room. She tried to pass, to disappear, but the blonde heiress in red blocked her path. Oops, came the whisper, followed by a sudden shove. The tray tipped, glasses shattered. Cream splattered down Eden's apron. Gasps rippled, laughter followed, and still, Eden said nothing. She picked up the tray, bowed her head, and turned to leave. But this time, she didn't make it far, because Colton moved, without a word. He stepped through the crowd, past senators, past cameras, past the women waiting for him to notice them. He reached Eden just as she reached the door, and he took the tray from her, trembling hands. In silence, and held it himself. The room froze. No one understood what they were seeing. Not the girls who had mocked her, not the men who had overlooked her, not even Eden herself. He looked at her not with pity, but with pride, as if to say, "You don't carry this alone anymore." And from that moment on, everything changed. After the gala, the mansion was no longer just a building of stone and silence. It became a battlefield of glances and whispers. The staff, once indifferent, now walked a little softer when Eden passed. Some nodded, others averted their gaze. But all of them felt that something sacred had shifted. The girl in the shadows had been pulled into the light, but not everyone welcomed it. The daughters of wealth and legacy, who had spent years shaping themselves into something worthy of a man like Colton, were now being outshined by a girl with borrowed shoes and a borrowed place in the world, but couldn't comprehend it to them. Eden was nothing more than a servant with a pretty face. But to Colton, she was a story that hadn't yet been told, a melody unsung, and he wasn't interested in another princess from the same worn-out script. He wanted the girl, who didn't want anything from him. The mansion buzzed with rumors. Some claimed she was after his money. Others whispered she had bewitched him. Few insisted she'd be gone by sunrise. Once Colton grew bored, as he always did, but they were wrong. Colton didn't play games. He began appearing more often. Subtle, deliberate moments. A breakfast where he only spoke to her. A walk through the gardens where only she was invited. A broken teacup she never even saw hit the floor, already replaced by the time she blinked. And then came the library. Late, one evening, Eden returned from her duties to find a key resting on her pillow, not labeled, just a small, antique key, and a note written in precise, elegant handwriting. For where stories wait, she followed her instincts, up the staircase, past the guest rooms, down the quiet hallway no one used, and there, behind a carved wooden door, she found it, a private library. Unlike any she'd ever seen, dustless, timeless, a world untouched by arrogance. Thousands of books, a fireplace still warm, in a single window that looked out over the night sky like it had something to say. She stepped inside, She didn't know if it was a gift, a test, or something else entirely. But she sat, she read, she breathed, and for the first time in her life, Eden felt invited. Days passed, then weeks. He never spoke of it. He never asked if she went. But every time she entered, something new was left on the table. A bookmark, a cup of tea, a folded note, with a quote that mirrored the exact page she'd marked. They were communicating in silence. And silence, it turned out, was louder than anything. But the more Colton saw her, the more dangerous her presence became. One morning, she found her closet empty, her clothes gone. Another. She discovered the staff schedule had been changed, her hours tripled, and then came the letter, slipped under her door. No return address, just 4 words, scrawled in sharp black ink. Leave before you're ruined. She held the letter in shaking hands. Her heart beat heavy in her chest, but she didn't run. She had spent her whole life walking away. Not this time, because Eden was beginning to realize she wasn't the one who didn't belong. They were simply too blind to see that the girl they tried to break was becoming the heart of the empire. The next days were quiet. Too quiet. The mansion's walls, once buzzing with thinly veiled insults and glass laughter, now seemed to hold their breath. Something had shifted. Something big. Eden still worked, still moved with the same quiet grace, the same discipline. But the smiles were gone, replaced with stares. The staff avoided her. The guests ignored her, and the girls who once sneered now wore masks made of panic, because Colton wasn't hiding anymore. He didn't speak of her. He didn't declare his intentions. He simply acted. A seat at the garden brunch was removed until he insisted another be added, a wineglass shattered until he brought her another. She was no longer the servant, no longer the maid's daughter. She was a presence, and that presence threatened every lie the elite had built around themselves. But Eden, still unsure of her place, began to question her own worth. Why her? Why would a man like Colton Whitmore, empire builder, the untouchable, see her? She didn't have their clothes, their families, their pasts built on foundations of marble and legacy. All she had was her heart. But maybe that was enough. Then came the summer finale, a masked charity ball, the final event of the season, a tradition, a spectacle, a stage, and a trap. The invitation wasn't meant for Eden, but it came, not from a planner or staff, from Colton's private assistant, quietly, discreetly, a silver box, inside, an ivory gown, silk, heavy, handmade, like starlight stitched into fabric, and beside it a mask of white and gold shaped like a swan in flight. She stood before the mirror, unsure. This wasn't her world. These weren't her feathers. But then she looked into her own eyes, and for the first time, saw not the girl who cleaned floors, but the woman rising from them. The ballroom shimmered that night. Every guest was cloaked, glittering, untouchable. But when Eden entered, silence followed her like a tide. The swan, she didn't speak, didn't need to, because across the floor, Colton turned, dressed in black and silver, face half covered. He didn't move toward any of the daughters draped in red. He walked straight to her and extended his hand. Whispers. Shock. But Eden took it, and they danced. Not for show, not for rebellion, but for truth. Because sometimes, it's not the crown that makes the queen. It's the fire she walks through to wear it. But their dance had only just begun. Jealous eyes watched. A plan was already in motion. And before the night ended, a betrayal would be revealed. One that would burn everything down. Before love could rise from its ashes. The night shimmered. Laughter floated like perfume in the air. But underneath the music, something sharp, twisted. Colton danced with Eden like the rest of the room didn't exist. The billionaire who could command empires was now moving in rhythm to the quiet heartbeat of a girl who once slept in a linen closet. But beauty like that, it attracts enemies, and envy, left unchecked, always strikes when no one's watching. Just after midnight, when the ball reached its peak, it happened. A scream, a commotion, and then, a lie. Eden stood accused to guests, missing necklace. Valued at 6 figures, gone, a setup, crafted with precision. Witnesses planted. Voices raised. She was seen near the dressing rooms. She lingered after serving wine. She's not one of us. Eden stood frozen as the mask slipped from her face, not the one of golden feathers, but the one of quiet composure. Her hands trembled, not from guilt, but from the shock of betrayal. The girls who framed her smiled with polished cruelty because they thought they had won. They thought she would crumble, break, flee. But Eden didn't move, and then Colton spoke. Just once, with enough force to silence the room. His security was summoned. A quiet investigation unfolded in minutes. Footage, keycards, witness statements, truth revealed, like a sword drawn in slow motion. Eden had never been near the necklace, but one of the heiresses had. The same one who smiled too wide, laughed too loud, the one who thought her last name could buy her immunity. Colton turned to her. Not in rage, but disappointment, because betrayal, when it targets someone you protect, cuts deeper than lies. She was escorted out. No drama, no spotlight, just consequences. But the damage was done. Eden stood there, eyes wide, tears held back like a dam on the edge of collapse. because even though she was innocent, she still felt humiliated, still felt like the girl they thought could be broken. She ran out into the garden, through the hedges, past the glowing lanterns until she reached the edge of the estate where the stone wall met the trees, where her story could have ended the way they wanted it to. Alone, unseen, but Colton followed. Not with a speech, not with promises. He simply stood beside her in silence, and then he offered her his hand, not as a gesture of rescue, but as a choice, a bridge from the world that tried to bury her to the one she unknowingly had the power to reign over. Eden took it, not because she needed saving, but because she finally realized she had always been a queen, and the man beside her, he hadn't made her one. He had simply seen what she'd been all along. Not every queen wears a crown. Not every love story starts in a ballroom, and sometimes the ones the world tries hardest to silence become the ones it remembers most. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs reminding. Your worth isn't written by others, it's written by how you rise. Like, comment, subscribe, because here, we tell the stories others are too afraid to whisper.